Sergio, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Hey, thanks, Ken. It's fantastic to be here in the holiday season. A lot to be thankful for, buddy.
Absolutely. And I was talking to you just a couple of minutes before the show started, and I'm looking at your background, and I just introduced you, and I'm like, this from the day you graduated college, and I don't know if it started before, but it just looks like this rapid ascent with no breaks, right? It's just like boom, boom, boom to get to where you are now. But I want to hear about the journey and maybe some of the things I'm not seeing on your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, so like anything on LinkedIn, like we talked about, you put the highlights, right? It's like your highlight reel. Nobody wants to put all your L's on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That actually might actually catch some attention for some people and actually might work. So that's probably a decent idea. But I was born and raised here in Miami, Florida. Cuban parents, first generation American in my family. And from a young age, I was always looking to push the needle, right, in my personal and professional endeavors, kind of dream big. One of the first things that I thought of doing, because I'm one that I feel that every stage of your life has a purpose, right? And it's different. And it's important to squeeze every drop out of each stage. And so when I was in college, coming out of college, I was very involved. I was, ran for student body president, running in student government, president of my fraternity, but those weren't without fear, right? Those
Yeah.
weren't, endeavors weren't without setting out high expectations of myself to get to where I wanted to get to. And what I find is that every stage in your life, if you push the needle and you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, you're going to get used to growth, right? On a daily, monthly, yearly basis, whereby if we're pushing the needle on a daily basis, you're making small steps every day. Pretty soon you turn around, you're like, damn, I've made it pretty far,
Right.
right? But let me tell you, it doesn't come without trepidation, without a lot of self-doubt, a lot of, questioning. Hey, man, what if I do this and I fall on my face, or what if I lose this election, or what if, I ask the girl out and she dumps me. So in every stage of your life, you're going to have that kind of desire for more, but you need the courage to kind of push, right?
Totally.
And
I
yeah,
wanted,
we can talk about the career and everything, because there's those stages in every part of our lives.
yeah, and I wanted to ask you, like, being first generation, in the U.S., because I've had, I don't know why, but the frequency sometimes of guests they set a trend, like in a certain way, right? So it seems like I think three out of the last four guests that I've had have had a similar situation, right? Where they were the first generation that was born here in the U.S., and they've all been very successful, and they've all had it kind of built into them that I don't know. I guess that's what I want to hear. Was it built into you? Was it something that was just expected? Was it like, hey, like we got you here, like it's time to show up. You're in the land of opportunity. I mean, what was that like as a kid? And did it feel like pressure, or did it feel good?
I think for most, let's say, Hispanic, Latino families, where they're, first generation kids, and the parents are immigrants, and, my parents came from Cuba, they like a lot of the Cuban American stories down here in Miami, they lost everything, kind of had to start from scratch. So you are born into a scrappy type of, like, hey, let's go, education's first, get it done. You're into sports, fine, but get your grades, get your degree. No one can ever take away that education from you. So that was always built in, saying, hey, we're gonna, you don't need a silver spoon. You start with whatever you have, and you start pushing, and you get there every day. So I think that mentality is very well built into kind of the immigrant story and the immigrant values, let's say, as they're passed down through the generations.
Sure.
And I have two kids, and it's, although their upbringing, think is a lot. I mean, my upbringing was great, right?
Right.
We felt like we didn't lack anything, although my dad was working just incredible hours to put food on the table, and they didn't have credit cards back then. It was all kind of cash, right? And so they had to really struggle and really hustle, but we never felt it, right? They kind of insulated us from that. So
Sure.
that was a blessing.
Did you feel So did it feel like pressure? I mean, I'm just thinking of you being 8, 9, 10 years old. I'm guessing everything was important. Like you're saying, you want to play sports, you want to do extracurricular. I'm sure grades were a huge thing.
Yeah.
Or did it feel like, I think some people adapt to that and go, I sort of got this and I can sort of run at this speed. And other people, it feels like a lot. Like, what did that feel like as a kid for you?
It wasn't, tremendous pressure, but there absolutely was an expectation to get your grades and get a degree. That was just like a non-negotiable, right? You're going to graduate and you're going to go to college and get your degree. And my dad had an MBA, and he also went and got his JD as an attorney. And so yeah, there were high expectations for sure. A bachelor's is kind of like a minimum requirement, and
I don't think I'd
probably
fit
an
that
MBA.
well. I don't think I'd fit that well in your family. Maybe some of the business stuff
Yeah.
they'd give me credit for now, but yeah, I approached it a little bit differently when I was younger. So tell me about so going to college. Where did you set your sights once you were in college, and what was your aim in terms of where you wanted to go with your career?
So my aim was always that I wanted to work for a Fortune 50 company, have access to international travel, international opportunities. And so that, and in business, right? That was very clear to me. And so when I was in college, I was very involved. Like I said, I was involved with my fraternity and student body and so forth. And I remember I was away on a trip on my senior year. I went up to Gainesville, and I was the president of the state council of student body presidents. So I went up there for a meeting, and a buddy of mine, his name is JC Del Valle, is still like one of my best friends today. He says, "Hey, there's a career fair going on. Do you have any resumes?" And I had some in my backpack. I had like 5 of them. And he says, "Give them to me. I'll hand them out when I get there." And so sure, and I had to go catch a flight. And so I come back, and I had a call from Caterpillar, which is a Fortune 50 company,
Sure.
globally recognized, international opportunities. And they offered me the job. And it wasn't because of my grades, because I had a B average, right? Kind of B plus from the start to the finish. But I was always, kind of the extracurricular activity guy. And so because of that, that demonstrated to them that I wanted to go above and beyond, and I can be trained on what they needed me to know. And so had an opportunity, right? And I moved at 22 years old, more or less, to Peoria, Illinois, the day before 9/11. So September 10th, 2001.
Oh wow.
And I get to my empty apartment. I just, leased it. I think it was like $850 a month or something back then.
Mhm.
And so, I'm there the week before starting, September 10th, 2001. And, then 9/11 happens and everything else like that. And as I was in this management rotation program, I was supposed to be moving around for about 8 to 12 months, and before getting sent out to the field as a sales rep. And I remember I was feeling just, talk about struggle, right? And getting yourself out of your comfort zone. I was 22, moved completely away from the family, because Hispanic families are very big, and we had all my family down here in Miami. So I moved to central Illinois, not Chicago, but Peoria, Illinois,
Right.
which is like right in the middle of the cornfields. Nothing to do there. It's tiny town, 180 cultural differences, 180 weather-wise, kind of everything. And struggled there for like 3 to 6 months, like really having to depend on myself, kind of break through those kind of comfort zones that I had myself in. But it was a blessing in disguise, because as I was getting rotated around, I went to an even smaller town. And then as 9/11, the economy stopped, I kind of got stuck there like musical chairs.
Mhm.
So, but as fortune would have it, and kind of going back to the Hispanic roots, one of the things that they expected, and that parents expect of their kids from the Hispanic side, is that they speak at least 2 languages, right? So Spanish and English being those primary ones. So I was the only guy that spoke fluent Spanish at this factory in Decatur, Illinois. And the machines that they made there, they made these big trucks, and their biggest market was in Spain. So they said, "Hey, would you go to Spain for 2 weeks and do kind of capture voice of the customer surveys?"
From
And
Decatur. From
from
Decatur. That's
Decatur.
an
And I
easy
said, "Hell
choice.
yes, I would
Yeah.
go."
Mhm.
And so I went out there for a couple weeks, and did that work. And I told anybody and everybody that was willing to listen to me that I wanted to come work in Geneva, which was like the European headquarters. and if something came open, to keep me in mind.
Right.
And so that's a key lesson that I want to make sure that people understand, is that when you know what you want, you need to tell people what you want,
Yes.
because if not, they're not, it's not going to be on your radar.
I'm glad we're talking about that right now. I've had people when I was in leadership, also at not a Fortune 50, but a Fortune 500 company, and I was in leadership, and we had management trainees and other people coming up in the organization, and I've had people come to us after, like, maybe, and shame on me sometimes, maybe for not being closer to the issue, but sometimes someone even moving on, right, like going to a different career, and because nobody read their mind, right? They said, well, I wanted to be considered for this, or I wanted to do that, but they're telling you as they're walking out the door. And I'm like,
Yeah, it's too late.
yeah. And I'm like, well, I wish our leadership team would have been maybe more engaged to have drawn that out of you. But moving forward, you're going to probably have the same problem at a different employer if you don't start asking for what you want and letting people know what you want. It doesn't mean you're going to get it that day. It just means that you're putting it on the table, right? And that if you have good mentors around you, that they can help get you there, right? So how was the mentoring at Caterpillar when you were there? Did you have a lot of good people around you that helped you rise through the ranks while you were there?
Yeah, so in terms of mentorship, it's really, yes, there were mentors. I don't think that there was a formal program for that. You kind of have to find, identify someone that you want to emulate and you think could help you, and you want to be able to help them as well, because I think it's a two-way street. Is you need to go out and it's your responsibility.
Right.
Caterpillar was very clear as to, hey, your career is your responsibility. It's not your boss's job to help you find another job and move on. Yeah, they'll be there for you, but you need to take control of that. And part of that was having those mentorship conversations, and even having, when you're having a performance review, is it's up to you and it's your responsibility to let your supervisor know what your plans are for the next 5 years. Like, where do you want to go? Why? What are the skills you need to get there? And what are you going to do about that to make sure you get those in due time?
Totally. I love performance reviews. You know what I mean? If it's with someone that I know is
You're
going
one
to
of
be
the few, right?
No, I mean, if they're going to be thorough, and if it's someone I respect, right? And I mean, to me, it's an opportunity to, again, I've got this North Star. In your case, I want to go to Geneva. And now is an opportunity, if that person is good, to say, here's what you need to do, right? Like, here's what you're missing, here's what you've got, and so to me, it's a great opportunity to, I don't know, get clarity usually,
Mhm.
So did you end up, and I know from your profile, you ended up in Geneva. So how long did that take? And what was that like?
And so once that opportunity came open, I got a call as soon as I got back from the trip. It was one of the guys that I met there, and he was moving to Dubai, and then he said, "Hey, my boss asked me, see if I can find somebody to replace myself, and do you want the job?" So I said, "Of course." The problem was that the program that I was in had already invested in me to be in the US, and so they didn't want to let me go. So I had to push and fight for this thing for about 3 months until they finally let me go out there. And so I moved out there in 2004 to Geneva, Switzerland. So I was going to be covering Europe, Africa, and the Middle East as a 24-year-old,
That's
basically.
amazing.
And it was an incredible opportunity. And again, another kind of notch on your belt and another push out of your comfort zone, where you're now needing to learn French and then learn Italian and learn other languages and other cultures and things like that. But I'm one that have always been a big fan of mindset. I think that is a huge, and it's very cliche nowadays and so forth, but getting up in the morning, building yourself up, building up your self-image, it's just like working out, right? You got to do the reps in order to get the muscle and
Totally.
to build the muscle and so forth. And if you don't do that on a daily basis, the famous quote that says, motivation is like showering, it's recommended daily. That is very, very true. And it's not about, raw motivation, but about psyching yourself up, right? And
Right.
getting yourself up to that point and say, okay, where am I going? Get revisiting that. What went well today? What am I going to work on? Kind of keep sharpening the blade and the sword each and every day. And you start taking little steps towards that, right? You start building up. And so as you continue to push out, all of a sudden your comfort zone has grown tremendously over the last, several years. So I was there for 3 years. doing that. And then from there, I went to Rome in Italy as a operations consultant, kind of working with our distributors and in leadership and their business operations.
And by
And
then,
they're
could you already speak some Italian? It sounds like because you had been learning it a little bit at least when you're
right,
in, yeah.
exactly. So the combination between Spanish and French then helps out with Italian because then the difference is so when if you know Spanish, Italian is very similar grammatically
Hmm.
in terms of how you say it, the way it's written. And but there are closer relationships between the root words in Spanish and French, although in French it's pronounced very differently, but there's a lot of similarities there. So once you get, two, the third one is a lot easier to grasp and integrate.
You know, one thing that I think is key in that first experience, and then I'm sure going to Italy, is I think what a lot of people, when they're not pushing for their careers, like we were talking about, right? Staking what you want, putting it on the table, and then going for it. I think a lot of times, like if you look at, it's self doubt, right? But I'm not ready for that. Like I need to do X, Y, and Z like before I'm like qualified to. And I'm not saying that that's not important to have the qualifications for a job, but every single person I know that has promoted rapidly through corporate America has always been in jobs that they're not ready for. I mean, to me, it was if you're in a high growth company that values leadership and you're on the uptick, every single time I got promoted was probably early. You know what I mean? And it always felt like I was drowning. It always felt like, oh my God, I went from having comfort because you're in a job, you get good at it, you get good enough at it to get some recognition, and then they tap you. And I'm not going to say no, because again, I've already made my intentions clear on where I want to go. But then it's like, oh my God, like, okay, now I just went from having a team of 30 to a team of 150 or a team of 150 to a team of 500 or whatever. But it's just the same process. Like you get in there and I think eventually, and it sounds like you developed this pretty early in your career that you were like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to know it all, but I'll figure it out pretty much. Is that kind of where your mindset got to pretty early with Cat?
Absolutely. And let me tell you, I studied marketing, and Caterpillar is a very engineering focused
Sure.
company. So there's a lot of brilliant engineers there. And talk about imposter syndrome. My God, I had it for
Yeah.
years, probably my entire career. Always a little intimidated by these brilliant engineers and not knowing, the details of, the nitty gritty of that world, right? Of the engines and
Right.
components and everything else like that. But yeah, say yes, get into it, and then figure it out as you go.
Yeah.
Because that you got to trust that you're going to be able to find your way.
Right.
And it's not easy. Obviously, it's very scary to do that. But I am a believer that the more often you do that and you come out the other side okay,
Yeah.
the more likely you are to say, okay, I know this story. I've kind of felt this before. I know that I was scared, 3, 4 times previously, and it wasn't that bad when when I came out of it. So jump in head first,
Yeah.
say yes, commit, and then trust that you're going to figure it out.
Totally
And
agree.
that was 5 years ago when I went out on my own and started that. I've always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, and we
Right.
can get into this a bit more. But it was that final kind of like when you're on the edge and you just need somebody to push you and trust that your wings are going to open and fly. That's a huge thing. But I had to go through a lot of those difficult, kind of trying
Yeah.
times in order to get to that point to have the courage to jump.
Yeah, you had almost 20 years or around 20 years of building that muscle of going like it doesn't mean that it's not scary.
Yeah.
It just means that you'll step into the fear instead of being ruled by it. And I think so many people get so caught up in the need for certainty, right? I need to be certain that I'm going to be able to like do well in this job. I need to be certain that the business is going to work out. And so they end up stuck because as much as they may not like being stuck, there's some comfort in it, right? Well,
Hmm.
no, I'd like to earn more money, or no, I'd like to have a bigger job, or whatever it is, but I'm good at the one I have. So like, let's just stay here. And that's the same folks that were waiting to get tapped by someone else for an opportunity that never came, right? So
That's a great point. And I always tell people the lights are not going to all be green You can't wait till all the lights are green for a mile to then
Right.
go. You just got to go,
You just got to go.
at your first opportunity. And because it's never going to be like that. If not, you'll be waiting around forever. And,
Absolutely.
and then
So,
to your point of, mentorship and ownership, you got to take charge of your life. Otherwise, the years go by, life is going to pass you by. And if you never take a chance, you never take a risk. For me, my biggest fear in life is not regretting something I have done, but regretting something that I haven't done. I don't want to be in my deathbed when I'm, 80, 90, 100 years old, looking back and say, man, I wish I would have tried that
right.
when it's too late. I'd rather try it and fail miserably, but at least I know I tried it out,
Yeah.
than look back and regret.
I agree 100%. And yet I agree 100%. And most of my career, I think I've applied, leaning into fear and stuff, but in certain areas I haven't. I mean, I didn't start my podcast until, a year and a half ago. I would have done it, I don't know, 5, 10 years prior because it was on my mind. But I knew it wouldn't be good like initially, right? I just knew I'd have to ramp up and I wasn't really ready to go through that. And so I still think there's things I'm constantly asking myself that question. What am I avoiding? Because I think our minds are tricky. Like, it's not like you analyze the whole thing and go, nope, I will avoid that. I think it's more like the way it manifests or the way that it comes up is more like excuses, right? That's
Hmm.
not the most important thing right now. I need to focus on this. So it's not an actual intellectual dialogue that you have with yourself that starts dismissing these ideas. It's simply the brain working in a protective way to say, don't, like, it's scary, so let's focus on this, or let's focus on this, or let's do the job at hand. Don't worry so much for that, right? um, Tell me a little bit about, so you wrapped up with Cat what in about 2018. By then you had been in 4 different countries, so Italy,
Yeah, so
Spain,
Switzerland,
Switzerland.
Italy, and then Panama. From there, I
Okay.
went to Panama City, Panama, and I covered about 19 countries in the Caribbean and northern South America for about 3 years, and then finally made it back to Miami, and was in the mining division for Latin America. And so at that point, I was, I think, ready to start something new. And so went and did my executive MBA at FIU, which is actually where we're at right now in my studio here.
Oh, cool.
And from there, I got hired as the executive director in the College of Business at FIU, doing development work, which was very new on the fundraising side. Wasn't a big fan of that, and so went back into on the corporate side. Actually led a consulting organization for the U.S. Called the Pacific Institute, which I'm still a huge fan of. They taught me a lot around mindset, starting from the founder. His name was Lou Tice. He passed away already, but he was a brilliant trainer around mindset, around personal professional potential, and actually got training from them in my early days at Caterpillar. And I think that's what really opened and solidified my mindset around the achievement, right, and the desire to achieve what I wanted to. And that was a big catalyst for me. And so it was amazing to lead that organization for a couple of years, and then went out on my own, and still close with them, and started my own organization doing strategic planning, leadership development, executive coaching, team building, culture, which I really love. And because I think everyone has a tremendous passion, but when organizations fail and when teams fail, sometimes it's around the product, but a lot of times people leave their bosses. They don't leave their
Sure.
jobs.
Yep.
And so when you have a leader where that makes you feel comfortable, that inspires you, right? That believes in you and sees things in you that you don't perhaps even see in yourself. That's an incredible gift. And I think people gravitate to leaders like that, right? And they will go above and beyond, the typical kind of check in, check out, I'll give you 80%, just kind of being here for a paycheck. When people give 120% is because they feel valued, they feel
Yep.
seen, they feel heard. And that is tremendously important when we talk about organizational performance.
Absolutely. I feel like, there's the law of reciprocity, right? Where how is someone going to care more about you than you care about them, especially when you're in the leadership role, right? So if you're not pouring into them, if you're not taking care of them, if you're not loving on them, if you're not truly invested in their success and in their longevity and career path and all of that, then they may stick around. I mean, because the environment may be okay. They're just not going to give you world-class results because, and why should they? I mean, why would
Hmm.
you? On the flip side, I think if you do all of those things, they'll take a bullet for you. I mean, those are the
Absolutely.
sales reps you can call up on the last day of the month and say, we need a big push. And they're like, yeah, we're not going to let Sergio down. Like we got to drive this home today. Right. And they really,
Yep.
and they'll do it without even being asked if they know what the goal is.
And that's key. It's getting them to have ownership, true ownership over the result. That they're not just working for somebody, that they own that result, they own that product, they own that sale, they own the relationship, and they want to succeed because they have a vested interest because they see themselves as part of the solution, as part of the value, not just an employee that that just comes to collect the paycheck.
Totally. So what made you decide to branch out on your own? Why did all of a sudden it become time? And I think it was 2018-ish, right? And
Yeah,
what,
yeah.
yeah, what was the catalyst for that decision, or had it been building for a while?
So ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to have my own business, have control of my own destiny. But, coming out of college, I wanted that experience. So then I can go out and do that properly. And, it was a blessing working at Caterpillar. I had so many amazing experiences there that are truly one of a kind. And at that point, I was ready to be, my own boss, really, and ready to take on that risk. Now, when you do go out on your own, it is a gut check like you've never had before, especially if you've been working in corporate or working for a paycheck your entire life, because all of a sudden those paychecks stop coming in and it's like, all
Sure.
right, now you got to go out and, hunt something down and kill it and drag it home and do it all right.
Yeah.
But it's amazing because if if you feel like you worked a lot as an employee, it's nothing compared to being an entrepreneur. But
Sure.
it doesn't feel like work because it's for you.
Right.
This is your baby. You're creating it. If you sleep in, hey, you don't get the result, that's your fault, right?
Yep.
It's all on you. So you're free to create as much as you want, as much abundance as you want, but you also have to face the fact that, hey, if you don't get off your butt and kill it and go out there and push it and convince people of the value you bring, then it's not going to work out. And that's why a lot of businesses, I think 9 out of 10 businesses fail in the first 5 years. If you're an entrepreneur, you've made it that long or farther, fantastic, congratulations, because it does take time. It takes a lot of guts to do it, but there's nothing like it. And so I've always wanted that freedom. I was kind of done feeling that somebody has control over how much I make or what my career trajectory is going to be like,
Yeah.
because having fear in your job about either losing your job or being, having fear about what your boss thinks of you, there's nothing more debilitating and sad and just like horrible and stressing in your
Yeah.
life than that, right? Is that fear of, oh my God,
But you went
can I
from
get
that
fired?
fear, yeah. But you went from that fear to going, because one of the challenges I think with doing entrepreneur, certainly not late in your life, but at the point in your career where you were,
Mm-hmm.
is you built up a pretty good paycheck by then, right? So it's not
Mm-hmm.
like, so the first company I started, I was like 22. There was no, I didn't have a whole lot of bills, right? But by
Right,
the time
right.
I left my corporate career and did this again, so I sort of did corporate in the middle. I had, 8 or 9 years as an entrepreneur and then 14 in the corporate world and then back to being an entrepreneur. It's like, like it's a decent amount of money that you need to bring
Mm-hmm.
in, and or cut your expenses or whatever. And I imagine you did a little bit of both. But what was that like?
Yeah, you're right. It is trading one fear for another, right?
Yep.
It's not a panacea on the other side. It's a big trade-off, especially, I have we have two kids, I have a
Yep.
wife, we have a house, we have bills, we have car payments, mortgage payments. And so that definitely adds to the stress, right? Because now it's like, hey, we need money coming in. So it's not just when you're 22, you're single, you got no expenses, you're living at home, like you could, you got some flexibility there. But it's a different type of stress, because when you're in a fear-based position, it's distress, right? Like you're in distress, and
Yeah.
it's really like a debilitating kind of moment, right? It kind of gets you sick, and like physically sick,
Yeah.
because the stress is horrible on your body and your physical and mental health. But when you have eustress, which is kind of like positive stress, right? That you know what you're working for. Yeah, you have the pressure, but you're excited about it. Like you're excited about what can come, and it's a positive pressure versus a negative pressure. I think that makes a big difference.
That's a huge point. I mean, I've said this before on the show, but I think it's important, and I really try to think about it a lot, is that fear and excitement to me are based in the same thing. It's like a prediction of the
Mm-hmm.
future, right? And one is
Absolutely.
simply going like, what if it doesn't work? It's probably not going to work. And excitement is it's going to work. We're going to have some bumps in the road. We got a lot to do, but we're rowing in the right direction, right? And it's going to happen. And I think that's the mindset shift that is so critical. And when I catch myself in fear, I usually ask myself like, what is this really? Like, what is this? Am I really assuming the outcome is not going to happen? If it is, if that is the case, sometimes that's okay. Like fear can stop us from doing stupid things, right? I mean, initially it was a pretty good emotion to have been there when dinosaurs were chasing us around, but now it's
Right.
like, is it real? If it's real, like, hey, if it's based on something, that we're doing, not doing, some kind of threat coming at us, then great. But if it's just made up, then let's identify that and squash it and move forward to a path that's going to be a lot more serving to us and to everybody else.
That's a great point. And one of the things I tell my coaching clients, and I even, I have to coach myself sometimes, is that when you have that fear,
Yeah.
right? I would list out, okay, what's the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
Let's say you're at a job. All right, let's say you get fired. All right, what's the worst case scenario? You get fired. Now you no longer have a paycheck. Okay, what can you do? Right, you can find another job. You can sell something off, right? That you can have some money to live on. If you can't pay your bills, okay, what if you refinance your house? So all of a sudden, it's not the end of the world. There are solutions out there, but if you don't kind of stop and write it out, okay, what happens if this happens? What can I do?
Yeah.
And then you're just living in this kind of nebulous, kind of fog of like, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen. This is, the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
But if you actually spell it out, hey, if this happens, I can do this. If this happens, I can do that. Well,
Yeah.
okay, so it's not as bad. So it's not as paralyzing anymore. It's not as debilitating, because you can see there's exits, right? There's
Yeah.
light at the end of the tunnel.
I think I think you're so right. I'm thinking of even with my own situation during COVID, being in the recruitment world, it stopped, right? It just
Oh yeah,
stopped.
froze,
Yeah,
dead.
froze completely. It was literally zero I remember we posted up zeros for like 3 consecutive quarters. And at first I was freaking out because I'm so used to just being on the hamster wheel, like just cranking it out, more candidates, and and then it just stopped. And I was like, oh my God, like, what does this mean? And it's like, well, I mean, we have some money in the bank. It'll probably come back. If it doesn't, there's about 1 billion other things I could go do, right? I literally started taking real estate courses like during COVID
Yeah.
because I'm like, what if people don't hire people for like 3 years? I got to do something. So, but you're right. It was that clarity of the freak out was in the unknown. The freak out
Hmm.
was our mind just going to a place that doesn't even exist, right? It's like, oh my God, like, are you really going to be out on the streets? Probably not. You're probably going to be fine.
There are solutions, right?
There are solutions, yeah. So, and there was peace with that, right? It wasn't the exact situation I wanted at the time, but of course, we ended up bouncing out of it better than ever. So, tell me a little bit more about Game Changers and like what you guys do. How did you start it? What did you guys do at the beginning, and how have you expanded it? What do you guys do now?
So it's interesting. So we started off. So I started off the consulting company in 2018, and doing executive coaching, team building, culture building, things like that. But I quickly found out that although I loved executive coaching because the impact it can have, it wasn't scalable,
Right.
right? It wasn't scalable. And so I wanted to impact as many people as possible. So one of the things that we did is develop the Game Changers Challenge. And that is an app-based experience that we run with teams, with large organizations, and to get them to take the actions and create and develop the behaviors that the organization wants, right? So if they say, okay, we want more ownership, more accountability, more trust, more communication, we want to build relationships, we want to improve sales, whatever that is, just like we talked about in the reference in the past, it's all about the reps, right? You got to do the reps. I can't show up to the gym for 8 hours and come back and be ripped, right? I
Right.
wish. That doesn't work that way. So what you need to do is show up every day. And so the app experience, usually over like 30 days with large teams, it gets them to take the actions on a daily basis that start moving the needle in their personal, professional lives. And it's gamified. So it becomes a very fun way, a very sticky way to get people to take action because they're competing against each other and gaining points and for some prizes at the end and so forth. And today we've been running these for the last couple of years. We've had about over 300,000 actions taken in the app,
Wow.
to date. So it's a very like fun and sticky way to get people to take action on a daily basis.
That's really cool. And so have you guys have moved out of individual coaching? You're doing more like through the app. You're still doing, I'm guessing, business
Yeah, we'll still
consulting
do
and
live leadership training, team building, culture building trainings. We do that as a way to scale impact, right?
right.
And to provide actual results to the client and insights as to, okay, taking the pulse of the organization, where they are today. So we do that. We also do strategic planning, which is incredibly important for organizations and leaderships to have a 3 to 5 year plan as to kind of where you're going. Same as we have, our personal plans. Okay, what do I want for my life? That clarity that we strive for on an individual basis, and knowing what you want, the organizations need to do the same thing and have a very clear picture as what's their vision, where do they see themselves in 3 to 5 years, have a very clear focused sense on your mission, because that then identifies also your values, just like your organizational values. Remember when we talked about that people leave their bosses is usually because their personal values are not aligned with the organization or their boss's values
Totally.
and what they find important, right?
Yeah.
And so as an organization, you need to be very clear to your employees, hey, what do we stand for, right? What underpins the way we act and behave here as an organization that guides us. So having that 3 to 5 year plan with strategic goals and initiatives and clarity and have alignment all the way down through the organization is incredibly important. And then that leads then to kind of what you do on the recruitment side, is say, okay, what's the talent that we need in these positions that represent us as an organization that can lead us to where we want to go. And so it works just kind of hand in hand.
And then you have a podcast as well.
Yep. So you can
yes,
see
tell me
here in
about
the
that.
background, Game
Yeah.
Changers. If you're watching the video, it's Game Changers Live. And so here I interviewed leaders who have been game changers in their field and have impacted the lives of thousands, to get their perspective on their journey, their struggles, their success, their mindset, their failures, so that we can inspire others on their journey.
Very
So I've
cool.
always been fascinated by people who have quote unquote made it, right?
Yeah.
Or have changed the game. And so I have them here to kind of pull back the curtain, right? And say, okay, what makes you tick? How did you do this? How did you get to where you are? Like, what were the roadblocks? What were the successes? Similar to what we're talking about now, and kind of pull back the curtain and see what they're made of.
Yeah, makes
And
sense
so,
that we've had so many crossover guests. I think we were talking about that before we went on, and we
yeah.
knew a lot of the same folks. So very cool. So awesome to hear more about you and learn more about you and your story. Anything else for our audience before we get going?
No, that's it. So, just remember that taking action daily on a daily basis, and also reflecting and celebrating your wins. We go through the day so often rushing, knocking out tasks, and then we get home, we talk to our spouse, and they say, hey, how was your day? And you say, it was good. Well,
Yeah.
what'd you do? A lot.
Yeah.
But do you really like stop to say, man, I accomplished a lot today. Like, I pat myself on the back. We never do that, right? We never kind of stop to recognize our wins. And it's so important to do that, because by doing that, you are building up your self-image, you're building up your confidence, your self-esteem, so that you have the energy and the courage to push on the next day, right?
Yeah.
And do those little things that you keep creating positive pressure in your life and expanding your comfort zone. So celebrate those wins, pop that little bottle of champagne in your head. You don't have to go announce it to the world how good you are, but internally, at least, you gotta celebrate that.
No, that's so cool. Thank you so much. You've given us lots to think about. I appreciate you coming on. Really a pleasure to meet you.
You got it, brother.
All
Take
right, man.
care.
Take care.